Right now with us on the program, very pleased to have Mark Hemingway, the online editor of the Weekly Standard. Mark, good evening to you, sir.
Hey, good to talk to you, Cam.
It's great having you on again. And you're pointing out at the Weekly Standard here that the Obama administration, already dealing with Operation Fast and Furious, and a lot of folks who say that, frankly, the answers that have been given by this administration, including the testimony from Attorney General Eric Holder before Congress, just doesn't really add up. Now, the most honest and transparent administration in history has apparently sealed the indictment of the killers or the accused killers of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry, and they're not saying why.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. Judicial Watch, which is an organization here in town that does a lot for government transparency, pointed this out. And, again, it's just we haven't gotten any satisfactory answers about this scandal, from day one. What's going on, why they were giving all these Mexican criminal gangs guns, and on and on and on. They insist, when asked that they were on the up and up, but they won't explain themselves. And then this comes along. There might well be a legitimate law enforcement, reason for, sealing the indictment. Maybe they are still trying to go after some of the people that are responsible, and they don't want to, tip off them some of the information that they do know, in the current investigation. But, you should come out and say something here because, right now it just looks like, they're trying to hide something.
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, apparently, we don't even know the reason why the indictment was sealed has been sealed. Now, Jerry Sieper from the Washington Times had a piece last week talking about this. Apparently, he's seen the indictment, and he says one of the things that the government alleges is that the 5 individuals, and they do believe, I guess, there were 5 individuals that were out there in the Arizona desert that night with at least 2 guns that had been sold in Fast and Furious. They were actively looking for Border Patrol agents to attack. They weren't out there, smuggling drugs. They weren't out there smuggling human beings. They were looking for law enforcement officers to engage in combat, in essence.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen the indictment. If that report is accurate, again, that's scandalous, and this is the kind of information the American people need to know. But again, border security is a hot potato of an issue in our politics, and I can see why the Obama administration wouldn't want that information out there, but they don't want it out there for political reasons, not because of public safety reasons or because the American people don't deserve to know. And the reality is that, we've been dragged through a lot, those of us that care about the scandal, that care about the rule of law. And it's time for them to start answering some questions, and with each new, revelation in this Fast and Furious scandal, the fact that nobody's opening up, no one's saying anything, I mean, it just makes things look, worse and worse.
Well, it really does. And one of the things that Senator Grassley's been doing over the last couple of days, I'm guessing in advance of Attorney General Holder testifying before the House Judiciary Committee, he's been putting out these press releases called Facts Are Stubborn Things, and just kind of going back and pointing out certain bits of testimony from various members of the administration. He pointed out that the last time Janet Napolitano testified before Congress, she said that when she went to Arizona right after Agent Terry was murdered and she was briefed on this, that nobody knew about the Fast and Furious connection. And then Senator Grassley just completely dismantled that argument, pointing out emails and documents showing within hours of Agent Terry's murder, they were well aware that the guns found at the scene of his death had been sold as part of Operation Fast and Furious. And so we're to believe that, again, when senior cabinet-level officials go down and ask, all right, what do we know about this, we're supposed to believe, I guess, that nobody told her. That nobody told the Attorney General's office. Again, the U.S. Attorney's Office was aware of this fact, and at the time, the U.S. Attorney in Phoenix was Dennis Burke, who was Janet Napolitano's old chief of staff when she was the governor of Arizona. But we're supposed to believe that these details just, never showed up?
Well, yeah, it's the same thing. We saw earlier, remember, part of Eric Holder's defense when he was testifying for Congress is that he was totally ignorant of memos that were addressed to him at the Justice Department. Where does this end? What point do they stand up and take responsibility for this? The guys at the Daily Caller the other day had an interesting story there where they pointed out that Barack Obama called for the resignation of George Bush's Attorney General because he hadn't, properly done oversight on I forget the particular scandal, but he basically called for the resignation of the Attorney General under Bush because he claimed that he was negligent in overseeing something. Well, if that was good enough to have, the resignation of Bush's Attorney General, I mean, what does he think about his own Attorney General? Again. And the other thing that can't be said often enough, this is not just a simple, whoops, I wasn't paying attention and this happened kind of story. I mean, this is a scandal where the American government willingly gave guns to organized crime, thousands of them, and it resulted in the deaths of at least 2 American law enforcement agents.
Yeah.
I do not know at what point, you could possibly make this a bigger scandal than it is, and yet somehow it's just not grabbing people the way it should, and the Obama administration doesn't feel the pressure that they should over this.
Well, no, and I think part of the problem, Mark, is that the people who are aware of this story, who aren't just reading about it, in a one-paragraph story buried in the New York Times or buried by the Washington Post, but the people who are actually following this story, they are incensed. But look, a lot of the mainstream media outlets have ignored this story. NBC, ABC, they've not even bothered covering when Holders testified before Congress on this. So you really don't have a lot of mainstream media information. We talked with Congressman Paul Gosar a couple of months ago out in Arizona, and he said that even the local press really wasn't paying attention to Fast and Furious, but that's starting to change. I noticed the Arizona Republic had a really big story over the weekend, and then they had an editorial today, or I guess this was in yesterday's paper, and they picked up on something that we've been saying for a while now. Why? They just asked the question, why did this operation even take place? They say, why run the guns into Mexico if they knew they couldn't trace them past the border? Why ignore the urgent reports of frustrated federal field agents that they were losing track of the weapons? And most perplexing of all, why in the world allow hundreds, now I would say over 1,000 of these quote-unquote high-powered weapons into Mexico without alerting the Mexicans? That's something that this administration has not been able to explain. Who on earth would have approved this operation when anybody, you don't have to have a great deal of experience in law enforcement to see the flaw in this plan to let these guns go into Mexico and then somehow track them to the drug kingpins and take down the kingpins?
Well, yeah. Again, this is the most astonishing thing about this scandal. I mean, you talk about this, every day, here on NRA radio, and certainly every time I write about it, it comes up again and again and again. Why? It's a simple question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's absolutely nothing about this operation that makes sense from a law enforcement perspective, and I am just astonished again that the most basic simple question about this scandal just remains totally unanswered, and no one is interested in well, I shouldn't say no one, but very few people that are influential in this country seem interested in getting that question answered. I mean, this scandal, just objectively, it's so much worse than, say, Watergate and a million other political scandals. But heck, how many stories have we done about Herman Cain, and
right.
his, sexual, harassment allegations? Here's a guy who's never even held elective office, and we've burned through, thousands of gallons of ink, trying to get to the bottom of what happened here. And, here we are. We have 2 dead law enforcement agents, several thousand, guns, but willingly given to organized crime to the United States government, and no one is out there on the front page of, our major newspapers, demanding to know why this even happened. It just makes no sense. That question alone, why did this happen? It would seem to be something that would spark such intense curiosity that people would get involved here. But it's just one of these things where with each new revelation, it just gets more and more damning, it gets more and more frustrating, and here we are, trying to wrap our heads around it once more.
Well, and a perfect example of, I think, the attitude of not only the administration, but I think a lot of the defenders of the administration within the media. Yesterday, Eric Holder apparently got in the face of the Daily Caller's Neil Monroe. Monroe asked him, what do you think about the growing number of congressmen who are calling for you to resign? And he whipped around and pointed his finger at him and said, you got to stop this. That this is not organic. You guys are putting people up to this, basically accusing the Daily Caller of, I don't know, mind melding with congressmen and getting them to say, oh, yeah, Eric Holder has to go. There is this reflexive desire, I think, not only on the part of the administration, but also their defenders, that there can't be a scandal in this administration. We saw Jonathan Alter a few weeks ago in Newsweek talk about the scandal-free first term of President Obama. Now, I mean, that's just sheer lunacy, Mark. You don't have to be a rock-ribbed conservative to say, no, there have been a lot of problems here in the first term, but I don't think I don't think the media wants there to be a scandal in this term.
Yeah, no, well, you're right about that. And the good news is that, even 15 years ago, you would have had a situation where I think the major media organs would have been able to shut this out of the national discussion. But the reality is I believe it or not, do venture outside the Beltway and spend some time in the hinterlands. And whenever this comes up, it's easy to find people who are know about it and are outraged. Is it as big a scandal in terms of caring about enforcing the rule of law and holding our politicians accountable as I would like? No, but is it having an impact on how President Obama is perceived and what's going to happen in next year's election? Absolutely, And because the basic questions are still so unanswered, and there's still so many more details we have yet to understand about this, it's one of these things. It could be explosive, at any moment here. Something could, break it wide open, and it could be something that the media finally decides to take seriously. So,
yeah.
Who knows? Keep hope alive.
Well, next step, I think, or the next opportunity, I think, for that to happen, barring any, a release of documents, would be Holder testifying again in early December before the House Judiciary Committee. That'll be coming up next week. So maybe we'll see some more media attention on this. But in the meantime, Mark, thank you for covering it for the Weekly Standard. I appreciate it, and look forward to having you back on again very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, Cam. I love appearing on the show, and you guys are doing great work.
Thank you so much, sir. Mark Hemingway, the online editor of the Weekly Standard, with us here tonight.